Well, welcome to the Get Fit with Jodelle podcast. I am, as usual, Jodelle, and I'm a little starstruck today as I sit here with today's guest, who is someone that I've watched on the video blogosphere for several years now and have learned an immense amount from. So to be able to podcast with this doctor is such a privilege. If you're suffering from chronic pain, if you're stuck in a weight loss plateau, if you're not getting results in the gym like you'd like, or you're unable to get back from the nagging injury or issue, you are not going to want to miss this podcast. You see, as a personal trainer, I could only get myself and my clients so far by working the muscles. And it wasn't until I learned to work the brain from this man that I really started to see changes in myself and in my clients. So I'm pleased to let you learn from the brain expert. That's what I call him, the creator and co-founder of Z Health. Dr. Eric Cobb is one of the world's leading experts in harnessing the power of neurology, of movement, to create extraordinary change in the human body, meaning that we're going to talk about how the brain affects your body, something that not a lot of people talk about. So in his 20 years of training, Dr. Cobb has developed a global and holistic approach to health and performance based on the brain. And I asked him here today to discuss how important brain health is to optimizing not only our health, but our weight, our workouts, and our life. So Dr. Cobb, welcome.
Thank you so much. It was always embarrassed the heck out of me, so thank you. That was
Well, that's my job. And it's an honor to have you here. I'm a huge fan. So I recently passed your Essentials course in your Z Health program, which I want to talk to towards the end. We'll get into that. And I want my listeners to understand how powerful the brain is when it comes to getting results with our health. So can you explain why the brain could be the missing factor in many people's quest for optimizing their bodies?
Yeah, this is always an interesting topic because what we're dealing with generally is this kind of global, I hate to say it, but lack of education. We have and when I say lack of education, I'm really talking about professional education, because it really is a job of professionals to say, listen, this is how the body works. And most of us who have gone through any kind of traditional educational process, particularly if you're in the movement professions, you were kind of inundated with biomechanics, kinesiology, the musculoskeletal system, and all of that information is incredibly vital. But one of the huge topics that I think that has been missing for really forever is, what's the control factor? Well, it's the CPU, right? It's the basic operating drive for everything that we do is the brain. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this is forgivable because prior to the really late 90s or so, we did not have sufficient technology available in a widespread fashion for neuroscience, and particularly neuroscience of movement, to even be looked at or even be studied. So we're kind of in this really cool, amazing few decades where we are finally starting to have an understanding of how everything that happens in the body is driven by neural processes. So one of the big challenges, I think, for a lot of people is starting to understand that everything that we do is brain derived. Every thought we have, every emotion that we feel, what happens to our thyroid, what happens to our adrenal glands, whether or not I'm strong, whether I'm flexible, all of that is actually decided at either what's called a cortical or subcortical level in the brain. So that has been my focus now for, I guess, since the late 90s. When I first got into practice, I was a good student in school. I learned all my stuff, and then I got out working with real people, and I got incredibly frustrated. I was also personally a high-level athlete and had a lot of injuries as a result, and a lot of the methods that I was learning didn't work on me. Mm-hmm. And so I was very frustrated with a lot of the traditional approaches. That's led me, like I said, into 20 plus years looking at how the brain and body can interface and trying to figure out, are there ways that we can specifically identify problems in the brain areas? Are there ways that we can stimulate that? And so it's really an exciting and interesting field. And what I love to point out to people is that you're always doing something neurologically, whether you know it or not. we just try not to do it accidentally. We try to do it on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, try to turn your brain off for 1 second and not think about anything or not process anything. I mean, it's really impossible to just completely not think a thought or not feel a sensation, so.
And that's one of the interesting things, even in, we look around right now what's happening in COVID times. Tons of people are talking about meditation and other things to help calm us down. And you can actually look at brain studies to go, okay, what happens when we meditate? What happens when we try to stop our brain? Well, the fact is the brain doesn't turn off. It just shifts its points of activity.
Yeah.
So even not thinking is still a version of brain activity. So this is all the stuff that I find incredibly fascinating.
As do I, yes. So with that, what would you say is the biggest issue you see working? Because you work with all populations, anything from an Olympic athlete all the way down to a little mom like me, So when you're working with these individuals, what's the biggest issue that you're seeing? What's the disconnect?
Whew, well, the big disconnect I'll start off with is saying that protocols don't fix people.
Okay.
And that's, I think, the biggest problem as well, because everything that we look at in the health and fitness industry is very protocol driven, right? We try to, on the research side, we want to do population size studies or studies with lots of people to try to find kind of this happy medium of, well, half the people did okay, a quarter of them were like, not so good. Another quarter had side effects. And that's generally, in the research world, we're like, okay, that's good enough. So I think the biggest disconnect is that whenever we look at brain function, everyone's brain's pretty unique. I tell people it's kind of like your fingerprint.
Yeah.
We can identify everyone by their fingerprint to some degree. And I do believe as technology improves, we'll be able to take basically brain fingerprints. Whenever we look at someone's pain, and let me give you an example. If I have 10 people with left knee pain, and I look at the brain function while they're experiencing that knee pain, all of them will have activity occurring in kind of similar areas, but at different intensities. So we say that everyone kind of has their own neurosignature for pain. Everyone has their own neurosignature for movement. So one of the biggest disconnects or biggest challenges is we have to be able to kind of figure out ways to individualize or find what works for the person. And this is being talked about not just on the movement side of the equation or pain. If you are in this field, there's a huge movement right now trying to figure out what they call personalized medicine, meaning how do you respond to a given drug versus someone else? We see most of this in the research world, at least happening in the cancer world, cancer treatment, where now they're looking at genetic signatures to say, okay, if people have this gene, this drug might work better for them. If they have this gene, it's not going to work at all. So again, we're kind of in this beginning stage around the world and in different fields of trying to figure out how do we personalize a movement prescription for you, a drug prescription for you. So that's kind of the first big finding, is that many people that I work with have tried kind of generic work. They've tried different fitness routines. They've tried different diets, and they're frustrated. So from there, our job really is to start to figure out, okay, what parts of the brain are doing a good job? What parts are maybe not doing a good job? And then we try to start to build very simple training programs or regimens for that person based off what we're finding in assessments.
Awesome. So to unpack this a little bit, so let's say somebody's trying to understand what part of their brain isn't working. Can you kind of brief us on the different parts of the brain and how they affect something like that left knee pain you mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So I always like to tell people, if you're ever in college, right, I was saying that we have what's called Neuro 101, like basic neurology. So the first thing I always tell people that they need to understand is that we have a divided brain, right? When you look at a brain, we have a right side and we have a left side. We would call that the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And if you've ever seen a picture of the brain, you've got all these gray squiggles on the outside. That is called the neocortex, meaning new. And then we have a lot of structures underneath that, which are older in nature. And you can kind of break them out into different pieces to go, okay, what does the new part do? What does the old part do? What does the right side do? What does the left side do? So from a movement perspective, particularly what I always like to start off with is to help people understand that the divided brain structure is very important in movement, because the right side of your brain basically controls the left side of your body. So if someone has left knee pain, I'm going to be really interested in the right side of their brain. So the basic rule is that the right side of the brain controls all voluntary movement on the opposite side. And by voluntary movement, that's most of what we would do in life, right? At least something that we're thinking about. If I'm going to do a bicep curl, I'm going to do a pull up and try to emphasize my left arm. That's all going to be right brain driven. The second thing to know is that all sensation. So if you go to your therapist and they put ice on you or heat, tiger balm, they shock you, whatever, on the left side, that sensory information also goes to the right brain. So that's kind of the starting point for people to start to look at this. Now, the other side of the equation is we have this voluntary movement component. We also have what's called a reflexive stability component. And most people have heard the word stabilization now in fitness, right? Everyone's doing midline stability and back stability and core stability exercises. And those are cool, but whenever you really think about them, they're voluntary.
Yes.
What we need reflexive stability, meaning we need the brain to kind of take care of keeping us upright against gravity all the time without us thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
You're a professional paddleboarder, you know exactly what I'm talking about. How horrible would it be to be on the board and have to think about your abdomen the entire time to stay upright? Right? It doesn't make any sense. So whenever we look at this divided brain picture, the right brain does voluntary movement on the left side, but it controls reflexive stability on the right side. Mm-hmm. So whenever we start to talk about, okay, how can I actually apply this? It has to be then connected really to history, meaning what's the problem that you have. So as an example, someone that has a right brain problem, they may have one or two joints on the left side of their body where they have pain. And that area feels kind of uncomfortable and it's a little bit difficult to move. They may also have a different history where everything is on the right side. Reflexive stability problem. All right. And so what I mean by that is, and you may have experienced this or other people are listening, and if you're talking to them, they go, yeah, I've had right shoulder problems, right wrist, right hip, right knee, plantar fasciitis on my right foot, tore my right medial meniscus, whatever. And right, they're telling you all one side of their body is a problem. Whenever we hear that, we go, right brain problem. So why that's really important is traditionally, as a doctor, a neuromusculoskeletal doctor, if someone came to me with that history, I would have probably, before I knew anything about the brain, I would have spent a lot of time looking at all those things on the right side of their body, mm-hmm. their shoulder, their elbow, their knee, their foot. But you have to go back to the basic rules. Because if their problem is on the right side, any movement I have them do is stimulating the left side of their brain. Mm-hmm. Any sensory work, let's say I massage them, I do some mobilizations, I do electrical stimulation, that's sensory. That's all going to the left side of the brain, which is in fact maybe completely incorrect. Because in addition to handling reflexive stabilization, this right hemisphere is also responsible for inhibiting what's called nociception. Right. Eventually, nociception turns into pain. So whenever someone has a right brain problem, often we wind up doing very weird looking things. Yes. They come in and they go, my shoulder hurts, my right shoulder, my right elbow, my right hip, my right knee. And we go, cool. We're going to exercise the left side of your body.
Yeah.
We're going to work the left side of your body. We're going to move it a lot. We're going to give you a lot of sensory work on the left side. And so you wind up having to draw a lot of diagrams for people so that they understand why we're doing these things. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of one example of beginning to understand more about how the brain functions in relationship to movement. Now, your other question was, what are the different brain areas and what do they do? So the easiest way to kind of go through this is to start at the front, mm-hmm. right? So if we pop my skull off, there's going to be these two frontal lobes. And most people have heard of the frontal lobe. Mm-hmm. The frontal lobe is a part of the brain that I call it the most human part of the brain. It's where it's the home of what we call executive function. Executive function is our basic logic capacity, our ability to handle difficult emotional situations with rationality, our ability to make future plans. We tell people that the frontal lobe is basically responsible for inhibiting the rest of the brain, because we do have this more primal part of the brain that wants to scream at everything whenever we're mad. Right. So the frontal lobe's job is to go, hey, calm down, it's not that big a deal. Mm-hmm. So when someone has a frontal lobe problem, we often see not only movement issues, we will also see emotional issues. So usually whenever we look at brain scans, people that have high levels of anxiety, people that are suffering from depression, clinical depression symptoms, we often see deficits in frontal lobe function. So that's the frontal lobe. Yeah. Then you go to the side. The next portions called the parietal lobe. And the simple way to explain this is it's the home of sensation. It tells you kind of where things are in space. If my eyes are closed and I reach up and touch my nose, I can do that because my parietal lobe is doing a decent job. People that have a poor parietal lobe, you ask them, close your eyes, touch your nose, they may hit themselves in the eye or put themselves in the throat. So the parietal lobe is about where things are in space. We then have what's called the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is the home at some level of hearing. So whenever we hear something in our processing of hearing, it also allows us to communicate. So it's part of the communication areas of the brain. It's also involved in memory storage, memory formation, part called the hippocampus. So people that are having temporal lobe issues, they may start avoiding, let's say, crowded restaurants. They go to a restaurant and they're like, it's just too noisy in here. I can't process what you're saying. So they'll have that. They may complain about memory issues as well. I can never find my keys. So these are kind of things that you ask about in history. And then in the back of the brain, and again, we're still talking about the neocortex here, we have what's called the occipital lobe. And this is the home of vision. So all the different eye drills that we do and visual exercises, at some level, we're always trying to stimulate that occipital lobe. And then you start diving deeper, and then we start getting a lot more names added into the mix.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's a good little intro.
No, it is for sure. And so they're like talking about the visual and the vestibular, like the auditory. You kind of have the three modalities that you work on with people, which is visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive. And it's kind of unconventional, but because not a lot of people are helping bodies from this standpoint, like you said, it's more musculoskeletal. Can you talk about the importance of vision training and vestibular training and how it can benefit the body, and proprioceptive, like how you said, bringing your finger to touch your nose with your eyes closed? Like people wouldn't think that that's a huge thing that they could do to help their body, but it is. It so much is.
It's so important. So the way that I normally explain this to people is I always use the analogy of a GPS, right? I always tell people, if you're old like I am, you probably had the original GPS that wasn't on your phone and it sat in your car, right? And
Tom.
Garmin, thank you, Garmin, for telling me calculating for years. So the way that a GPS works, in general, modern GPS uses 4 satellites. But in order for it to even be functional, there have to be 3, right? And so basically, we've got this central computer, and it has to find 3 satellites to connect to so that it can triangulate, and that's what allows us to figure out where we are. So I tell people the human body basically has a GPS system. We have our eyes, we have our inner ear, which is our vestibular system, and we have our proprioceptive system, which is all about knowing where my joints are in space and how they're moving. And so the way that our brain works, our brain is constantly taking information from those 3 systems and it's comparing them. It's trying to say, all right, well, my eyes say that I'm going in this direction. My vestibular system should also tell me I'm moving in that direction, as well as my body. And your brain's willingness to move fluidly, to move well, to move powerfully, is based off the quality of that information and also how synonymous the information is, meaning, does it all match up? So whenever we think about working with people, trying to improve pain or improve movement or hormonal regulation or whatever, we're very curious about, does your GPS system work well? Or is each system providing accurate information? Because we've all had that experience of you're driving along for 500 miles down the freeway and your GPS is fine. And then you get into the city, tall buildings, and all of a sudden you lose connection to a satellite, and now you have to pull over to the side of the road. It's exactly what happens in the human body. When the GPS system is not working well, we slow down. We are more fearful about finding our way where we're supposed to go. And in the human body, that equates to increased muscle tension, decreased range of motion, pain, kind of a whole host of problems. So, and let me just give you a little backstory on this, because I didn't go to school originally and learn all this. This has evolved over time, and a lot of it evolved from just observation. Years ago, I think I'd been in practice for about 2 years. I had a client I was working with, and she had chronic neck and shoulder pain. So I was doing all the stuff that I knew. We were doing a lot of mobilizations. We were doing a lot of exercise. We were doing a lot of massage, a lot of different therapy modalities. And she would get some better. And then she'd go back to work and it would get bad again. And then it would get better when she saw me, and she would go back to work. It would get worse again. And I was very frustrated because I'm like, okay, maybe this is just going to take a long time, but I'm very impatient as a human being, and I never liked that. So I kept trying different things. And she wasn't improving. And then one week she was gone. I was seeing her on a Monday. I didn't see her until the next week. She came in, she looked at me, and she's like, I feel fantastic. And there's always this temptation when you're a provider of any kind or a trainer of any kind, and something cool happens. It's always tempting to go, I'm awesome, right? And finally, all the stuff that I've done is finally caught up. But early on, I kind of learned, no, it doesn't really work that way. So I said, well, what changed this week? And she's like, it's kind of weird. I went to the eye doctor. I figured out my eyes had gotten much worse. And so I got a new prescription. And within 2 days of wearing my new glasses, all my neck pain was gone. Mm-hmm. And that was literally kind of a triggering event where I went, I am an idiot. Meaning, if someone has poor vision and they are changing their posture all day because they're looking at a screen, well, there's no way that 5 or 10 minutes of exercise, massage, or whatever therapy is going to solve that problem. So that literally, as I said, I think that was in 1996 or something. That was kind of a key initial understanding to go, okay, there's more to movement than just the joints. There's more to movement than just muscles and tendons. So from there, obviously within our curriculum, we spend a lot of time evaluating the different qualities of the visual system. There are, in the sports vision world, we talk about 20 plus different qualities. Some of that's eye movement. Some of that is acuity, how well you can see accurately in different lighting environments, how quickly you can track something. So there's all these different qualities. So we try to test all of those and identify what are you good at, maybe what is problematic for you. And then we do the same thing for the inner ear, the vestibular system, because the vestibular system is incredibly powerful. It is, I tell people, it is the system in the body responsible for preparing us to deal with gravity, which is the single most influential force throughout our lives, right? We're born with it. We're going to deal with it until the day we die. So we need to know where we are in space. And the vestibular system, that's basically what it does. It's very, very cool. It has, when you look at the anatomy of it, it's really amazing. We have basically an XYZ axis and these things called canals. And then we have some specialized organs that tell us if we're moving forward or backwards or stepping to the side, if we're going up or down. And we have one on the right side and one on the left side, and they have to talk to one another. And your brain interprets all that to try and help you know which direction am I going and which way is up. That's what it comes down to. Yeah. So small problems in the vestibular system can cause, I would just say, incredibly dramatic problems for people. Anyone who's had vertigo knows exactly what I'm talking about, right? And you're fine, you wake up in the morning, and then 30 minutes later, you're laying on the floor, holding on the wall, just going, please God, make the world stop spinning. Yeah. And it's terrible. People that have never had vertigo are less, I think, able to understand just how impactful the system is. So what we are looking at are gradations, right? If true vertigo, and there's multiple versions of that, it's completely disruptive of your life. But you can have small issues with the right side or the left side that you are not consciously aware of. But the vestibular system provides a tremendous amount of reflexive input. So people with back pain, people with shoulder pain, people with neck pain, people with plantar fasciitis even, and foot issues, we often can track that back to problems in the vestibular system. So that's the visual system, vestibular, and then finally, the proprioceptive system, as I said, is knowing where you are in space. And what you typically see in the fitness world is people do a lot of very gross motor activity. And by gross motor, I mean, lift weights, do push-ups, do pull-ups. That's all cool. It's fantastic. I love strength training myself. But at some point, you have to own your body, meaning you need to be able to control your joints. You need to be able to know where they are in space. And so we have a whole kind of assessment and training program to increase your own awareness of where you are. And our goal in all that is to make sure, as I said, that your eyes, your inner ear, and your proprioceptive system are all sending the same information to your brain. Because when we do that, your brain gets more calm. It says, all right, you're you're safe. I know where you are. And generally from that, we see big changes in pain and performance.
That's fantastic. Yes, this is
very long-winded explanation. But.
No, it's like perfect because when you read about, oh, it's visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive, most people are just like, over my head, I'm done reading now. But when you break it down like that, it makes so much sense, especially going back to your client about, you had worked on her massage and her body mechanics and all of that. And then it wasn't until you realize that she does the text next where she's coming forward. And it's like, if people would stop and think, why do I have this pain? Is it something that I am doing, or is it something that's really deep brain focused? Like it's something that on a cognitive level I'm struggling with, or like you mentioned with frontal lobe, like I'm having trauma because of what I went through or how stressful COVID's been. Like all of these things are deeper than just the musculoskeletal. And so like your way of thinking helps people ask why. And that's what I'm big on. Is it's kind of like going to the doctor and they test your blood pressure and they test your cholesterol and nope, all your markers are good. Well, then why do I feel crappy? Well, then the doctor should be asking, how do you sleep? What's your job? Let me see how you hold your body. What's going on? And if we would ask more questions like that, we'd get a lot more answers. And I think that's what your visual and vestibular and proprioceptive offer. So I want to go back to the vestibular for a second, and because I've recently become very intrigued with the vestibular nerve and how it relates to calming the body, because I'm of this mentality now that everybody I work with just needs to calm the heck down. So it's like I wanted to get your thoughts on, ways that we can really stimulate that vestibular nerve or take care of it, if you will, and help the body calm down.
Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of different ways that you can work on the vestibular system, and for many people, it can have a strongly calming effect. Mm-hmm. The easiest way I explain this to clients, I go, listen, have you ever held a baby? Yes. What did you do when the baby cried? I bounced it and I rocked it. Mm-hmm. Right. So guess what you just did? You just gave it a tremendous amount of vestibular stimulation. When you look at children, what do children often love to do when they're at the playground? They love swings. They love things that make them spin. They love to go up and down. So we see very often children, I think, are maybe, I won't say more in tune with their bodies because they just have a different nervous system, but very often they are stimulus seekers for things that they know that they need somehow intuitively. So whenever we look at the vestibular system, there are some key rules that you have to follow. All right. So the first thing I tell people is that if you're going to do any kind of vestibular work, you need to do it in a very safe fashion. This system for many people is very sensitive. So if I say, hey, I want you to start doing some what we call VORs, that can really be problematic for someone that has a mild vestibular problem. So we have to make sure that we're monitoring speed. We have to make sure that they feel safe and steady. So for people that are new to this, I often recommend, hey, we're going to do some vestibular work, but you're going to lay on the ground. Mm-hmm. You can't fall from there, right? You're already there. You can't fall. So that's usually my starting point for people that are compromised. And then we go to a chair. When we put them in the chair, we have them hold on to things. And then we go to standing, we have them hold on again. Mm-hmm. So there is definitely a progression that you want to think about when it comes to the vestibular system. And I always tell people the phrase is safe but challenging. Mm-hmm. Safe but challenging. That's what we want. So whenever we take the vestibular system and break it apart, there are 5 sensors on the right and 5 sensors on the left. I always tell people just do Mickey Mouse ears. You got it. So the first 3 are canals, and the canals are sensitive to head movements. And one of the primary jobs of those canals is to help regulate what happens with our eyes with what's happening with our head movements, our head motion. So one easy way to stimulate the vestibular system is to just put a dot on the wall or put something in front of you and just go through different head movements. In vestibular rehabilitation, they start off teaching you yes, yes, no, no, right? So yes and no. And you just start off some very, very comfortably looking at a target, moving your head, but keeping your eyes on that target. I call it the creepy doll reflex.
Right. You ever had, yeah.
You had a sister that had a doll, right, that was always watching you. That's the VOR. So that's where we start with people. From there, so that basically means you have to keep the eyes still and move the head.
Okay.
That's number one. And then number two, we want to coordinate head and eye movement together. So now you take that same target, you move it to the left, you follow it with your eyes and your head. And although that doesn't seem like that would be very complicated, it's actually very challenging for people, particularly when you start doing different angles. Mm-hmm. Because of the way that these canals sit, we have to do rotations, flexions and extensions, and we also want to do things in diagonals. All right. So I tell people basically, if you think about a compass and you've got cardinal and ordinal directions, as long as you're moving your nose at some point along all 8 lines, you're going to take care of a lot of the stuff that's going to stimulate those canals. So that's one way that you can create vestibular stimulation. Now, obviously, right now, I'm not getting into what if they have a right side problem or left side problem, because you may need more specific help from someone that knows how to evaluate it. Mm-hmm. Then we go to the second 2 set of sensors. And these are typically referred to as otolith organs. Oto is a word that means ear, lith means stone. So people have heard about crystals or stones in your inner ear. Well, that's where these things are found. These are the otolith organs. So we have one that's called the utricle. And we tell people the utricle is if you're in a car or a train. It tells you forward and backward. It also tells you side to side. Mm-hmm. So people that need a lot of vestibular stimulation, you want to focus on having them do things that they don't normally do. So if you have someone that's a runner, ask them, when's the last time you ran backwards? When's the last time you walked backwards? When's the last time you did 50 meters of sidestepping to the right and 50 meters of sidestepping to the left? Often with the vestibular system, the easiest place to start is what have you not been doing? Because each direction stimulates the vestibular nerve in a slightly different way. This is one of the reasons there is a little bit of research looking at putting people in swings, even adults. You put an adult in a swing, well, the forward motion we get a lot of. What we don't get a lot of is the backward motion. So I put you in a swing for 5 or 10 minutes, you're going to get a lot of utricle stimulus in a backward direction, and that may help people calm down. And then we have the second one, which is called the saccule, and the saccule is for vertical. So we tell people this is for the elevator. Mm-hmm. So again, what have you not been doing? Well, a lot of people, especially that don't feel well because they have a vestibular problem, infrequently lay down on the floor, stand up, go back down to the floor, stand up. Usually the most they ever do is from the bed up or from a chair or sofa up. So something as simple as trying for 2 to 3 minutes, just get up and down off the floor is a great saccule exercise. If people are comfortable, you can have them hold on to things and just have them bounce. We have people do a lot of general bouncing exercises. So again, the basic rule is safe but challenging. So if getting up and down off the ground is fine for you, you don't really feel any different, well, then we need to make it more challenging. So now we're going to have you do some bouncing. Could we put you on a trampoline, like a light trampoline? Absolutely. Could you sit on a Swiss ball and bounce? All these are different ideas around just creating some really, really simple vestibular stimulation. Now, from a calming perspective, without getting into details, we don't know particularly which of those is going to affect people appropriately. So this is where you have to do some testing. But usually, as I said, the secret is in the history, and the easiest place to start is what have you not done in a long time? Mm-hmm. Because the way that our brain works is when our brain doesn't feel safe or comfortable with a specific structure or the function of a specific structure, it will modify our behavior, often unconsciously, and cause us to begin avoiding those types of movements that would need or would cause stimulation there. So it's a kind of an easy place to start. And you can even do that on yourself. You can take your own history.
Yeah, you segued perfectly into what I wanted to talk about next, which was safety. So you're safety, but challenging. But a lot of what you do is because some part of the brain has told the body it's not safe. And so a lot of our movements that we're doing, we're actually on some level telling the brain this isn't safe, and that's why I'm not doing it, or that's why I don't do that as much as I do this, And so, yeah, let's open that a little bit, because like you mentioned the nociceptors before, which are threat signaling receptors, and so they signal that threat. So can you talk about like why that is. Like, what are some things that we can do to help our body feel safer? And some of your programs, like a quick plug, is that if anybody watching this will just go on YouTube after this and Google any sort of pain and then follow it with Z Health, they're going to get a video that you've put together of quick little drills that they can do, which are phenomenal because they work, because you allow them to see, okay, test yourself first, now do the drill, test yourself after, and all of a sudden you're like, what just happened to my body? It's amazing. And it's something free and easy they can do at home. But can you talk about that, the safety mechanism?
Yeah, so all of this whole idea kind of comes out of modern pain neuroscience. For 400 or 500 years, really, and unfortunately, there's still practitioners that don't know that much about pain. There was kind of this belief that there was this one central area in the brain that would light up whenever you had pain. We thought there was a pain center, and that's not true at all. All right, what we now know, kind of incontrovertibly, is that there is no central one pain center. Whenever someone is experiencing pain, there are multiple areas of the brain that are involved, and most of them aren't involved with sensation. They're involved with planning. They're involved with emotion. So it's a really multifactorial process. And the theory behind this is called the pain neuromatrix theory, or neuromatrix theory of pain. And the end story of all this is that pain and movement issues, as well as endocrine responses to threat, can be induced by the brain at any time when our threat levels are sufficiently elevated. So let me kind of explain that. Most people are really, they've had the experience of, maybe I've had some low back pain in my life and I haven't had it for years. And then I get in a bad fight with my significant other. And I wake up the next morning and I'm like, oh man, my back, what did I do yesterday? And we kind of automatically go into this default setting of it. I must have done something wrong in movement. And that's not true, because the way that the brain works is that as we go through our day, we are generating or collecting threats. I tell people you have a threat bucket, right, in your brain. And as you go through the day, let's say you just changed your prescription. 3 weeks ago, you were playing pickup soccer with your kids and one of them wasn't paying attention and smacked you in the head with a ball. So maybe your inner ear's off a little bit. You haven't worked out for 2 weeks because it's COVID and you can't figure out how to get somewhere or whatever. So now I have a visual problem, I have a vestibular problem, I've got some lack of proprioceptive awareness, and now I have an emotional event on top of it. But what's now happened is I've got one threat layered with another, layered with another, layered with another. At some point, when our threat levels go up high enough, our brain will enact some type of protective response. And we always tell people pain is important, it's a powerful tool, but it's very imprecise. I could say the same thing about flexibility changes or strength changes. It doesn't tell you what's wrong. It just tells you that your brain's unhappy about something. Mm-hmm. So then it becomes our job to start to figure out within each of these systems and what's going on, how do we lower the overall threat? So everything about the human brain really is, I tell people there's a filter that everything runs through, and it's a threat or danger filter. There's a really famous pain scientist, his name's Lorimer Moseley, and he says that the first question the brain asks about everything is, how dangerous is this really? Right? I'm having a conversation with someone, it's getting a little bit less nice. Mm-hmm. Rather than being rational and starting to try to figure out, okay, what's going on, the very first human brain response is more primal, and we begin questioning, how dangerous is this? Mm-hmm. So our brain is made to identify danger first and foremost, because survival is all that our primitive brain cares about. Mm-hmm. It doesn't care about tomorrow. It doesn't care about what's happening in someone else's world. The primal brain says survive for the next 30 seconds. So everything is evaluated in that way first. The second thing that helps people understand this is to kind of understand the basic operating principles of the human brain. And what we know at this point is the brain, particularly the human brain, most of our function is based on predictive models. In other words, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, we are creating imaginary events. We're looking out there and we're trying to predict what could potentially go wrong, because that's the easiest way to stay safe. So whenever we talk to people about their eyes and we talk to them about their vestibular system and their proprioceptive system and all the other systems that we discuss, we want to look at that from a threat perspective, because basically, if your brain cannot trust what's coming in from your eyes, if your brain cannot trust the information to be incredibly precise from your inner ear, if your brain cannot trust the information it's receiving from your right knee, well, guess what? Prediction becomes harder. Everything becomes more unpredictable. What does unpredictability breed? Well, it breeds all kinds of things. Everyone knows that you can feel very stressed when things become chaotic. We've just lived through a year of chaos. Yeah. Another year of chaos to go. What it looks like right now. So on top of that chaos, your brain is going, I don't know what's going on. So we're looking at that not only from a global perspective, environmental perspective, but also from an internal environment perspective. So really the job of a movement professional, and I don't care what degree you carry, if you're trying to help people move better, feel better, get out of pain, is to help them identify threat. And once you've identified where that threat may be coming from, figure out a way to lower that threat level. Maybe that means that you just have to help people sleep better. Maybe that means I have to make a referral because your eyes are so messed up. And I don't know vision drills. Well, that's fine. Refer them to someone that does, because whenever we can lower any threat, we're actually draining that whole bucket. And this is one of the cool parts I tell people, it's always very surprising for students in our curriculum. Often the very first experience I have, someone comes in with, let's say, shoulder pain or knee pain, and you go, hey, try this vision drill. And you do a vision drill and their shoulder and knee pain gets better. It's sometimes like this huge paradigm shift in the world to go, that's crazy. How did that work? Well, the problem actually isn't in that shoulder or knee most of the time. It's in the brain. And all that we have to do is lower threat. If we lower threat, almost everything begins to improve. And like I said, that's not just about pain or movement. That also, when you look at the kind of total threat response in the body, there are digestive changes, there are hormonal changes throughout the body. I always tell people, if you can't remember that or don't know that, think about the last time you were really adrenalized. And you're driving down the road, maybe a little too fast. You look up, you see the red and blue lights in your rearview mirror. What happened? Your heart rate's kicked up. You started sweating. You're not a criminal. You're not going to jail. You were driving 6 miles an hour over the speed limit, unless you are a criminal. Maybe that.
Different story.
Adrenal response, and any kind of threat can create that. It just may happen at a lower level, and we can become accustomed to it. We can become habituated to that. Most people know that adrenaline prepares you for fight or flight. It interrupts rest and digest, right? So when I'm highly threatened or even moderately threatened, I'm getting an ongoing kind of adrenal response throughout the body. I'm going to have probably digestive issues. I may have changes in what's called the HPA axis. So basically changes in my thyroid, my pituitary, my adrenal glands, all of these things that we would call stress-induced diseases that most people are familiar with. That's driven by the brain perceiving excessive levels of threat, either externally, internally, or both.
Fantastic, because there is so much in my line of work as a nutritionist, there's so much hormonal problems too. Like everybody's endocrine system is off. When you look at the majority of people's blood work I'm seeing, their hormones are off, and maybe they're chalking it up to, oh, I'm getting older, or I don't eat as well as I should. But they need to understand that it could be coming from a threat response, a feeling of safety in the brain, or non-safety, as it were. And so to that effect, let's say somebody is having thyroid issues. What would be something that you would work on with them on a simple level that would start to help their thyroid function better?
So a lot of different options within that. Normally, whenever I look at something, well, I'll just tell you my personal bias.
Okay.
The vast majority of people that I work with that have some type of hormonal issue, I always evaluate the visual vestibular system first. And in fact, it's almost always the vestibular system first. When you look at the vestibular system, there are some relatively direct connections from the vestibular system to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to drive basically the entire endocrine system response.
Right.
So we see often a significant impact of vestibular drills on almost all endocrine issues. So that's often my initial starting point. On top of that, when you look into the neurology of all this stuff, you have to think about the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is cranial nerve 10. A lot of people have now heard of the vagus nerve. So usually when people are experiencing thyroid disorders or dysfunction, you want to look at the vagus nerve because it's responsible for innervating and also basically sending tremendous numbers of signals to the brain from the gut, from the heart, from the lungs. So it's kind of the primary communication pathway from what we eat to the brain to know what's going on. So I do a lot of work, as I said, with the vestibular system and then some kind of specific work with the vagus nerve as a general starting point.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. And you even have videos about how our brain can affect our weight loss. Like I don't think people are thinking, well, it's all about the food, it's all about the food, it's all about my exercise. But if they'd add in the component of helping whatever part of their brain is kind of off, that could be a whole nother game changer for them. So like what's been your thing that you've seen the most as far as brain training, if you will, that has affected people's weight loss?
If I were to be, I guess, very specific, all the stuff I was just talking about with the vagus nerve, that's the place that I normally start. Vagal stimulation can be relatively profound for a lot of people because it's quite anti-inflammatory. There's some really interesting research on rheumatoid arthritis and a variety of other inflammatory conditions that respond well to vagus nerve stimulation. So whenever you talk about weight gain or obesity, usually we see a strong inflammatory component that's involved in that as well. So that's a really, really great place to start. Beyond that, as people get more into neurology, it's a really fascinating field for me with regards to weight and as I said, kind of the obesity crisis, because I think what's missing for many people whenever we talk about food and we talk about eating behaviors is most people, I think they kind of heard the idea, but I think they've heard it more from an emotional perspective. I like to tell people that eating is a form of self-therapy. Just put it that way. Now, when people hear that, they go, "Oh, you mean I'm stressed and I'm eating because I'm stressed?" And I go, "No, that's not really what I mean. What I mean is this. Let's say, let's talk about the stomach. All right. So the stomach is kind of a balloon. What's supposed to happen is as I eat, the stomach stretches. And there are neural receptors. There are mechanoreceptors. And mechanoreceptors are nerve endings that respond to stretch in the stomach. Now, let's say that for whatever reason, either through conditioning or maybe I was just born this way, let's say that I have low sensitivity to those receptors, meaning my brain doesn't actually notice when that stretch is happening. So that information from the stomach is part of the afferent, what's called afferent information. So that's part of the signal sent via the vagus nerve back to the brain. So let's say I'm stressed out all the time and I'm fatigued all the time. Your brain knows that you need more vagal stimulation. So guess what? It says, all right, well, let's eat, because whenever I eat, I get vagal stimulation.
Oh, wow. You
And
just blew people's minds right now. Their minds are blown.
This is the way that I look at eating issues because they have been grouped for so long with willpower and whatever. And I go, look, you can't outsmart your own brain. If it needs a type of stimulus and is using food to provide itself that stimulus, then one of the hardest things to do is to take that stimulus away unless you provide an alternative. So what we try to do a lot is look at what are some other versions of vagal stim that you can do so that maybe you don't have to use food to get that same, or at least a similar signal to the brain to help you calm down, to help you, whatever the problem is. One of my general rules about neurology is that people are doing the best they can with what they have. That's right. Very few people, and again, on a neurologic level, it doesn't make any sense to go for your brain to say, I'm going to wake up this morning and do poorly. Remember, our brain it's survival oriented. So it wants the best for us at any moment in time. So whenever you can kind of start to review and classify behavior based off that or that perspective, it really changes, I think, how you think about yourself. I think it changes how we think about our clients. And then it challenges us to go, all right, well, what do I understand? What do I not understand? And how can I provide maybe some substitutes? There's a couple of studies that have been run in Brazil that I find really interesting on weight loss. And again, this is just talking about neurology and how important it is to consider signals to the brain. So they took a couple of different groups of people that were diabetic and overweight, severely overweight, and they put them on a very low calorie diet, which is very challenging already. So they had a control group, but then they also took a experimental group. And for the experimental group, they did what's called percutaneous, which means they put needles in them, TINS, transcutaneous electrical stimulation. So most people have heard of TINS, right? You go to the doctor, they put this little pad on you and it tingles. That's all that it is. It's just a cutaneous stimulation. So they focused on what are called the T6 and T7 dermatomes. So whenever you look at the spinal cord and the nerves go out, what feeds the stomach is typically T4 to T5, T6, T7, meaning the thoracic spine. Mm-hmm. So they looked at T6 and T7 and they put needles in and they just basically gave them a little electrical stimulus. They did it an hour, one time a week. And the weight loss that group had compared to the controls was like 20-1. So it was basically this substitute, right? And this is one of those things I point at all the time to say, listen, the brain's doing the best as it can. It's looking to take care of itself, utilizing what tools it has available. Food is an easily available tool, right? It's an easily accessible tool in our current world. So I think that's one of the things we see a lot of people defaulting to. And obviously there's the chemistry side of it, right? We know that depending on your body and how you respond, you're going to get glucose, you're going to get fats, and that may make your brain feel better as well. So for me, it's a very fascinating side of the equation. And I'm hoping over the next couple of decades, we'll start to see more discussion of looking at the brain-food interaction from this perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I love a lot about what you say on not just here, but on your other videos is you're bringing awareness to people that it could be this. It could be that this is the issue. It could be, and it's stuff that people haven't thought about. And then you give them practical tools to implement, to go, just try it. Just see how it goes. Just try this little breathing exercise or try this little drill with your hip or whatever. And 99.9% of the people I've talked to that have done it have been like, that was a game changer. Like that changed me. So like once you find, like you said, whatever that tool is that your brain is lacking, then that you'll know when you do the little drills with you. And another thing that I love, some of my favorite videos of yours are the respiratory ones about breathing and how important breathing is with the brain. Can you just briefly share with us about that, about why you like breathing?
I'm a breathing fanatic. Actually, I was doing a bunch of breathing before we got on the podcast.
Good.
Yeah, I tell people your brain needs two things to stay alive. It needs fuel and it needs activation. So it needs to be used. The fuel is oxygen and glucose. Those are our primary fuel sources for the brain. So whenever you get into neurology, I think it would be unethical to not talk about breathing. Yeah. Right? It's the easiest way to fuel the brain. It's far easier than manipulating a diet. It's far easier than messing around with hormones and whatever. The fastest, easiest way to change brain function is to manipulate breathing. And obviously, we can all call up thousands of years of tradition of breathing exercises. We have yoga traditions, we have martial art traditions that go back thousands of years that people have always pointed toward breathing as a potentially useful tool. It would probably shock people to know how little research has been done on brain function and breathing, particularly the voluntary aspect. They started looking at brain function and breathing as far as the reflexive side of it, maybe 40, 50 years ago. If you actually want to look at what happens when I decide I'm going to breathe a certain way, we're talking about studies in the last 5 years. Again, it is really a brand new field for all of us. But what I can say about breathing is that you can manipulate brain function actually very quickly and relatively easily just by working on different breathing patterns and breathing styles. It's an incredibly powerful tool. And I think if more people would explore breathing in an intentional way, I think a lot of them would find that provides them the stimulus that they need in an incredibly accessible format. You don't have to change clothes, drive to the gym. You don't need a trainer, right? Once you understand the basics, it is a really cool way to prepare yourself for almost any kind of situation. The biggest challenge is that most people don't do it enough or do it long enough for the changes to become lasting, right? And that is one of the bigger issues, because whenever we talk about anything changing in the brain permanently, we use a term called plasticity, right? That the brain can change, and it does change, but it does need some practice. So there are, as I said, there's a ton of different breathing styles out there. Normally when I do breath work with people in the beginning, because I'm focused on the brain, we usually start with short inhale, extended exhale breathing patterns, whatever that may be. 2-second inhale, 4 to 6 or 8-second exhale for 5 to 10 minutes, right? Just starting with that. Because what typically happens is, as we do that, we will often cause a dilation. So we'll cause the blood vessels in the brain to open up a little bit. So we'll change cerebral blood flow. And usually that means good things for most people. Like that is the easiest starting point. I think I did a blog not too long ago that we now know there's kind of some specific brain or breathing patterns that are great for people that are in pain. And again, it's pretty easy. Set your timer for 60 seconds. Play with some different ratios of breathing 5.5 to 6 times per minute, focusing on a longer exhale than inhale. Like it literally is that simple. And then from there, you can progress into making breathing a really challenging exercise and create a lot of different benefits from it. But as I said, for me, it is one of my very favorite go-to tools.
I totally agree. Within the past year, the breath work that I've been just playing with myself has been transformational for my own self. So like it's something that I think is so underestimated because it's free and you can do it anywhere. And people really want that pill, that just give me the pill and then I'll feel better. Like tell me what food to eat and then I'll feel better. No, there's lots of free things that you can do that will make you feel better, and you have to be consistent with them. That's the key. You got to be consistent. And so one way they can do this is by accessing, you guys have awesome blogs and your newsletter that comes out, and then all the free content, oh my gosh, that's on YouTube that they can pull up with Z Health. You had a recent video about why your brain doesn't want you to change. Can you just brief us on that? Why doesn't our brain want us to change?
Yeah. I always forget how many blogs we've done. That's kind of a funny one. So the easiest way to kind of explain this in behavior in general is that change costs energy, right? We all know that. We know everyone's tried to change a habit. Everyone's tried to change a relationship or whatever. And usually the first few weeks of any change, you're like, I'm exhausted. It's tiring. So if we think about the brain potentially having evolved in a calorie deficient environment, right? So we think about that. Most people have seen, hunter-gatherers and whatever, tribal living. And if you've ever been in the military or spent any time on an extended outdoor excursion where food wasn't provided for you, what you very quickly figure out is it's really tiring to acquire food, right? It's energy. It costs energy. Yeah. There's an old story that says, lions could kill and eat lots of field mice, but they don't, because they would eventually starve to death, because the return on investment for eating a mouse for a lion, it's just not worth it. So our brain, there's a theory out there called the selfish brain theory. And the basic idea is that anytime we try to enact a change of any kind, our brain will often resist it because it is calorically expensive to do something different. So there's always this kind of push-pull mechanism that is going on where your brain's like, really, you don't need to exercise. If you think about this from my brain wants to survive right now. It's not my frontal lobe, right? My frontal lobe wants to look like a fitness model. But the rest of my brain's like, dude, no, you don't want to look like a fitness model. The chair is comfortable. The sofa's comfortable. If you get up, it's going to cost energy. So there's this, like I said, this kind of ongoing clash between our more primal survival-based brain and our reasoning or neocortex. So it really, the behavior change side of the equation is very interesting to me as well, because it is one of the starkest contrasts between the new brain and the old brain. And most people would like to think that we're very rational and very, our new brain is great. Well, the fact is that the vast majority of us, most of our life is lived by whatever primal drives we have, and we just kind of ride the elephant a little bit. Right? I can't remember the authors, but there was a great book on business some time ago. And the analogy they used was the rider and the elephant. You're riding an elephant, you think you're in charge, but you're really not. And that's kind of how our brain is, right? Our neocortex is riding an elephant. We think we're in charge, but really we're not. So it is a ongoing challenge to figure out, how do I get those two areas to cooperate? What I can tell you is that the safer the old brain feels, the safer our more primal brain feels, based on all these things that we've been talking about, the more readily change is possible. When the more primal brain feels very threatened, change is very, very, very challenging. It's very hard. And so this is one of the reasons we have one of our courses is called Sustenance. Sustenance and Spirit actually is the name of the course. It's our nutrition course. And I tell people it's about 10% nutrition and about 90% behavior, helping people understand how to craft behavior change into their life, because that is the environment kind of determines that for us. And most people have never given a lot of thought to the environment that they surround themselves with regards to behavior change. What also comes to mind, just as an example, we're talking about breathing and how powerful it's been for you because you did it.
Right.
It's amazing to me how often I had patients over the years. And I would say, I show them, they do the exercise, they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. I feel so much better. And I say, okay, do that every day. And then I'll see you again. And they come back and I go, hey, how are you feeling? Oh, about the same. Did you do the exercises? No. And whenever I was a young practitioner, I would get very frustrated. And I thought, what's up with that? And then over time, as I got more deeply into this and more deeply into behavior, it became very apparent that it's not that they didn't want to, it's actually that they forgot. Right? Almost everyone has this experience regularly of today is the day. You wake up at 7, today is the day, today is the day. And then 10 p.m. rolls around, you're like, today, oh, I forgot I was going to do X today.
Right.
So you have to really get people to understand that there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing weird about them. This is just how our brains function. And we have to build regular reminders and behavioral triggers into our lives to help us do the things we want to do.
Sounds like that temporal lobe's pretty important to get them to remember, since that's where they forget.
It's kind of crazy, though. It's really kind of crazy, though.
But yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with just giving something as simple as that breathing exercise you just gave for people to start there. Start there and set a goal of, I'm going to do this every day for 5 minutes for 7 days a week. And you can do it anywhere. You can do it in your car while you're driving. You can do it while you're laying in bed. You can do it while you're watching TV, whatever. And so maybe that's just a place that someone can start. Now, I would love for them to find out how they can learn more, other than, like I mentioned, going to YouTube and just typing in Z Health. You're going to have a plethora of things, and also going to your website and signing up. I'll have that link down there below, but just tell them a few things that you have going now. Like, you guys have offered classes all over the globe for a time, but because of the system that we're in now, everything's online. So I want you to mention that too.
So yes, our website's a great place to find us. We're super active on Instagram. So if you're into Instagram, you can check us out at zhealth_performance. We post a couple times a day. I put a lot of drills on there as well. Our blog, I think we have 360 or 380 blogs out. And they're all free. You can just go watch them. Like I said, we've got a search bar and you can look up things. If you are on the professional side of the equation, or just someone who's really interested in this, we've taken our entire curriculum online. We have what's called Z Health University now. And we have a quite extensive curriculum for professionals that covers about 600 hours of coursework. But we also right now, last year during COVID, we started this little 8-hour, it's free online course called Neurofundamentals. So if you are interested in just how does the brain basically work? How do I apply some of this information? What are some basic eye exercises? that is a fantastic place for people to start. You can find that on links on our website. You can find it via links on Instagram. And I just encourage everyone to, if you get a chance, take it. It's very, what I found over the years, and one of the reasons I still love teaching about neurology, is I think that people, once they understand more about how their brain functions, number one, it explains a lot of the things that maybe have occurred in their life that they didn't have an explanation for. And more importantly, because I'm a super pragmatic, practical guy, it's very empowering to know that there are things that you can do about it. I tell people that probably the biggest gift you can ever give someone is a gift of hope.
Yeah.
And if you have been struggling with pain, you've been struggling with weight, struggling with sticking to a program, whatever, understanding that there are probably a huge number of possibilities available to you is really important.
Yeah.
Because most people try 3 or 4 things total, and they go, I can't do it. It doesn't work for me. And the joke I always make with clients is I go, listen, I cannot tell you how many patients I've had over the years walk in with a chronic issue. I start talking to them and I'll say, so what have you done? And they'll say, I've seen everybody. And I go, no.
No, you haven't.
You really haven't. You haven't seen me, number one, first of all. But number two, I then ask them, like, okay, how many people have you seen? Well, 3. All right, that's not anywhere close to everybody.
No.
So if you can, if people see that there is a possibility and that it makes sense, that there's a scientific, I think, backing for it, I think a lot of people can benefit from that. So the Neurofundamentals class is a great place to just learn more, to go, okay, how do these basic systems work and what are some starting points?
Fantastic. Yeah, because education is the key to success. Like, you got to educate yourself about what's missing, what's lacking, where did I go wrong, what's the missing factor that I'm not addressing. So yeah, and I really think that all of your information is something that gives people hope, like you said, and offers them, hey, just try this, see what happens. So I really encourage people, if nothing else, if you're not going to do the breathing that he just recommended, just right when this is done, go to YouTube and just type in like anything you're having an issue with, and then Z Health, and see what pops up, and just do one drill and you're going to notice a difference. So that's my tip for the day. So anyway, Dr. Cobb, you've been more than generous with your time. I want to thank you for this. And if nothing else, they also want to watch your little videos, because you always have cute little bloopers at the end of, like, if you have a mistake in your words.
I'm an idiot.
Well, it takes one to know one, so that's why I get a kick out of them. So anyway, thank you so much. This has been awesome. And I'll make sure and have all of the links for everything down below so everybody can click on those.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Dry skin, hair falling out, sleep issues, low energy, constipation, digestive issues, even trouble swallowing, and feeling like your neck has a lot of tension. These can indicate a thyroid issue. And now more than ever, I'm seeing subclinical thyroid issues in virtually every client I work with. So what's one easy way to amp up your thyroid and improve your health overall? Natural desiccated thyroid. And no, you don't have to go to your physician to get that. You can actually get natural desiccated thyroid from Ancestral Supplements. It's a company that I love and work with. I love their beef thyroid, beef liver supplement. Did you know that you can only make the T4 to T3 conversion into that active thyroid hormone if the liver's in check? So get your thyroid and your liver in check with Ancestral Supplements beef thyroid. Click the link in the description and use my code JODEL to save 10% on a great thyroid support that your body will love and it will thank you for, in the way of getting rid of all of those symptoms I mentioned at the beginning of this. Is your gut right? Are your hormones in check? Well, ATP Science is my new go-to brand when it comes to lowering estrogen and getting your gut right. In fact, their product, Gut Right,
is on the top of my list with regard to an all-around supplement that I would recommend to almost any client I work with. It's so imperative that we get our guts right in order to absorb all the nutrients from our foods that we're taking in. Our guts are under so much stress from our food system, from the stress of the system we live in as a whole, to dangerous radiation we're bombarded with. When you hold your cell phone right in front of your stomach, you're actually radiating your internal organs and kind of breaking down the gut lining, so to speak. So alongside with that, social pressures from social media. Yeah, guys, Facebook and Instagram totally affect your gut because it affects you on an anxiety and nervous level of, you're seeing all the pressures of what your peers are doing and can you live up to that? So it puts pressure on you. So you might want to consider getting your gut right by doing a 10-day protocol of the gut right. So simply order yours today. Use the link in the description as well as my code JODELLE, Jodelle, which gives you 10% off. And take Gut Right for 3 times a day for 10 days. Then begin balancing your hormones with my favorite product, Alpha Prime. And can I just say that I've had several clients that have lowered their estrogen by half within almost 6 weeks' time. They've lowered their estrogen from astronomical numbers in half by just taking the Alpha Prime. So this is a Jodelle approved product that everybody that's dealing with hormonal imbalances or excess estrogen should be on. So order yours today, start moving the needle in the right direction and feel better faster.